Okay, I think we're ready to get started. There might be a few people who who join a little bit and who continue to join, and that's great. We want everyone to be here. We want everyone to feel included. Hi, my name is Jason, and Jason Uribe, and I use the pronouns he and him. I am one of the senior garden teachers here at the Edible Schoolyard Berkeley project. And I am finishing my 11th year here at the middle school that we work with, which is King Middle School. So nice to be here with you in this moment and have the opportunity to greet you for this session. I am going to pass it on to one of the other garden teachers, Sophia.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning from the second day of summer here in Berkeley. I am Sophia Fox, and I use she, her pronouns, and just finishing up my first year here at MLK Middle School with Edible Schoolyard. And I'm going to pass it on to our other coworker, Tamika.
Hello, good morning, everyone, or maybe not morning, depending on where you're at. My name is Tamika. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the third garden teacher here at Edible Schoolyard Berkeley, and just finishing up my first full school year with the project here. So again, thank you all for coming to this session. We're really excited to have you here. And as a quick overview of this session, we'll be talking about our garden classroom that we have here at Berkeley, first guiding you through a photo journey to see the space, and then diving a little bit deeper into the space and how we use it with students and ways that maybe that can be applicable to your work in garden education. Then at the end, we'll be using a Padlet tool, which we'll explain more, to have some question and answer with us, and also to kind of talk a little bit about all the different knowledges and resources that maybe you all are bringing from your program. So hopefully having a little bit of time for sharing and sort of interfacing with that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share screen. Hopefully this will work. All right. Everyone can see that?
Can't see the present. Oh, there we go.
Yes. Presentation?
Yes.
Great. All right. So to start off, we wish that you could be here in our space with us. So we are trying to recreate that through a photo journey that we've created. So we're going to guide you on this journey through our garden space. And as you observe the photos, we want you to reflect and imagine that you're here with us. And as we do that, we have some questions for you to be thinking about. So please go ahead and write down these questions, perhaps in a notebook or on a little piece of paper. And these are kind of going to be how we want you to orient towards exploring the space with us. So what do you notice in the space? What do you wonder about the space? What does the space remind you of? And what does the space make you want to create in your work? And these are also questions that we use with students as we're moving with them through the garden space. I like to say often that my role as a garden teacher is really just to be a guide for the garden, who is the real teacher. And so we hope that in seeing our space in this way, you can also think about how the garden classroom that you create or that you operate in can be a teacher in that way as well. To move through our space, we'll be using this map so you can kind of imagine that you're here. And this little carrot is going to be our guide. And so we're going to start our tour here on the map at the Ramada. So here you are in the Ramada, and you notice that there's a circular metal structure around you. Take a seat on the wooden benches and look across the circle. A grape leaf brushes your shoulder as it climbs up the surrounding metal. In the center, you see a little garden bed with lots of different plants. A small lettuce, a giant scallion, some white flowers. Take a deep breath. What do you wonder about this space? And now moving on from the Ramada, get ready to leave. Maybe you'll come back later. And we're gonna walk southward and walk past this long table to arrive here at the outdoor kitchen. As you walk down the length of the long picnic table, notice the benches where you could rest and sit. The table is empty now, but you can envision it filled with a feast. At the end of the table, you enter a covered area and smile at the cool shade. You turn on a sink and rinse off a freshly picked lemon to eat as a quick snack. What does this space make you want to create in your space? Also, sorry folks if the videos are being kind of funny. Wash your hands maybe one more time. And we're going to head on over to a newly planted perennial area. So take a moment here, stop, sit, and observe. There's a symphony of colors that dances in front of your eyes as you take in the different blossoms before you. Pastel pinks and oranges explode among vibrant blues and fluffy whites. You smell the fragrance of flowers and hear the buzz of bees. Take a moment to slow down and watch this mini ecosystem. What do you notice about this space? And now Sophia is going to be your guide for the next part of this tour.
Thank you, Tamika. Notice the large area in the center of our garden. Here, our little carrot guide takes us into the row crops. As we move through the garden, underfoot, you feel the crunch of wood-chipped pathways. A few inches below the mulch, there are layers of cardboard to deter weeds and retain our precious rainwater here in California. Here we've arrived at our beautiful bluish-green brassicas, rows of broccoli and kale. The shade of the espaliered apple trees is on our backs as we look westward, with the cool bay breeze rolling up the hills. Is there anything you are wondering about our row crops that you would like answered later in our Q&A perhaps? Take a moment to notice and jot anything down that you'd like to chat more about later. Leaving the mature plants behind, we follow our little orange route over to the propagation station and the greenhouse area. Traveling from our row crops to the propagation area, we'll pass through the shade of the figs, the apples, and one of our students' favorites in the fall, the pineapple guavas, to arrive at our greenhouse. Our greenhouse is a kit that was added to the garden in the year 2000. The tables around the building are lush with plants in transition, awaiting transplanting or to be sold at our annual plant sale fundraiser. Just outside the greenhouse door, there are beautiful mature oaks, creating cool shade on our propagation tables for working with our students. Just behind the greenhouse is a table space under a shade tent, where our outgoing 8th graders recently enjoyed their final experience at the Edible Schoolyard Brick Oven Pizza Making Week. And it was a joyous celebration of students getting to toss their doughs and add toppings from our garden and put it into our brick oven and celebrate their last few weeks here at King before they go on to high school. Is there anything interesting about this space that you are noticing? Leaving the propagation area, we take a short walk towards our tool shed. Arriving at the tool shed, you find yourself fully sheltered in the shade of the old oaks, including our beloved grandmother oak, whose canopy engulfs the back of the garden, creating a comfortable space for staging tools and projects, as well as another meeting space. Outside of the tool shed are wheeled tool racks, glove boards, boots for muddy days, and many wooden bins of thoughtfully organized garden supplies. The tool shed is a beautiful structure made partially of a fallen redwood tree with a stone floor and features a giant sliding door for easy access. Upon entering the tool shed, the light dims and the temperature drops. A great place to be yesterday when it was very hot here in the bay. Once your eyes have adjusted, you can begin taking in all the signs and structures in place to keep the tool shed clean and intuitively functioning. Just outside the tool shed window, the sound of ducks and chickens let you know that you are close to some of our students' favorite location in the garden. The hanging baskets in the window are beckoning you to follow the clucking outside and hunt for chicken treasures. What does this space remind you of? And Jason will continue us on our journey.
Thank you so much, Sophia. So seeing the map here and following again the carrot on the map. So behind the tool shed, we hear the sounds of something familiar and find ourselves by the chicken coop. And so in the chicken coop, in the chicken coop runner area, our garden friends are tending to daily chores, scratching, pecking, pooping, and eating. We enter through the gate, but please remember to close it behind you. Stop and listen to the sounds and notice the trees. Notice the hillside that is wild and inviting. The ducks are resting now, but they can be very loud when they are excited. Grab a basket if there are eggs to collect, or just come in to the coop to say hi to Raven in one of the nesting boxes. Take a break and sit on the cob bench. Maybe you'll observe more. What else do you notice about the chickens and the ducks and where they live? And so from the chicken coop, we go east in the garden, following our carrot on the map, next to the grandmother oak and the shaded strawbell circle. We notice mysterious piles under black hardware cloth. This is where we find Compost Row. And so in Compost Row, we build compost piles from kitchen food scraps and garden waste materials like leaves and straw. Come add your food scraps here in this box, and we'll incorporate them into a new pile. Find a pitchfork from the tool shed so you can easily layer all the materials. Fill a watering can and hydrate the pile so the microorganisms and other decomposers can heat the pile. How hot is it? Let's read the thermometer. Finally, let's identify the pile that is the oldest, the one that looks more like soil. Grab a wheelbarrow and the compost sifter so we can extract the final product, black gold. What do we do with this enriched soil? What do you wonder about Compost Row and how it works? And so passing it back on to Tamika to lead us through this next section of our tour.
Thank you, Jason. So just to take a moment, go ahead and close your eyes and think through all of those different spaces and photos that you just saw, even with the slightly funny video. Imagine that you're here. Think about the different sights and sounds, the different smells, maybe some of the things that might be similar to the garden space that you operate in, and some of the things that maybe are new or really different. I just want you to return once more to that question that we opened with. what does this garden space make you want to create in your garden space? And now we're going to talk a little bit more about how our garden space has been created. And we really want to acknowledge here that our garden, we hope, is a big inspiration to you all, but that this garden at the Edible Schoolyard in Berkeley has been developed over 25 years with lots of access to different resources, and with different, things that have contributed to the program and the space that we have today. And so it may or may not be similar to where your program is at currently. But in thinking about how what you're learning and seeing today can inspire your space and your work in garden education, we want to share the core values behind designing this garden classroom. And we hope that these core values can feel applicable at any scale, in any sort of work. And so the key ideas that we're thinking about, both as we design the garden space and as we think about how we utilize those spaces with students for garden learning, are community, interconnection, and sensory education. And so when we're thinking about community, a question that we're thinking about is, how do we build relationships with each other, with students, with the school, maybe with other creatures? When we're thinking about interconnection, we're trying to think about the space in ways that facilitate interaction with the earth in ways that are mutually beneficial. And when we're thinking about sensory education, we're thinking about, how do we learn through hands-on experience and sensory observation? How are we creating a space that makes that easy, makes that intuitive for ourselves and for students? And so now we're going to go through our garden again. And this time we're going to explain a little bit more about each of these garden spaces that we've shared, and how these core values show up in the work that we do with students here at Edible Schoolyard, in the hope that some of these ideas will feel applicable to your work as well. And again, I want to encourage folks, as you listen, to think about things that you want to hear more about, things that you'd like to add to in the question and answer, as we start to give you a deeper glimpse into the different ways that we use our garden with students. All right. Sorry, one sec. My slide is not switching. Oh. All right. So our first space is the Ramada, which we started out with. And really the purpose of this space is to have a central gathering space. And so you can see here we have both the Ramada, which is our big metal structure in the middle of the garden, but we do also have the straw bale circle as another central gathering space. And a central gathering space is really important for us because it really emphasizes the importance of community building, and also is a great way to facilitate more like instructional time experiences with students. So we will welcome students at the start of classes in an opening circle in the Ramada, and we will also hold a closing circle with students at the end of class. And kind of having these routines helps to build this sense of community, and this idea that we're all coming together in one big project. I often like to talk about the garden as like this giant collaborative group project that every student in the school is working on together. We have our central gathering space arranged in a circle because that makes it so that every student can see each other and they can see us, and they can also see any materials that we're sharing. We have different boards that we will put up on the side. You can kind of see we can hang things here in the Ramada, but you could also just, hold something up in the center, and everyone can see it when they're in a circle, and everyone can kind of pay attention more easily. So we also will use our central gathering spaces for instructional time, maybe to deliver more academic content, or to talk about something that's more of a lesson for that day rather than going out and doing activities in the garden. And so our next spot that we visited is the outdoor kitchen, which is what we call this covered area, and then the long table, which is what we call this very long picnic bench. And so the outdoor kitchen and the long table are really important because they help us to celebrate the joy of food and eating in the garden, which is a huge piece of what we like to do with students in the garden and kind of the key values behind this space. So students can prepare food at the sink. They can wash things that we've just harvested with them. And they can also use these spaces to cut up and prepare things. In the past winter, we juiced a ton of lemons from our lemon trees, this beautiful guy, with students. I think over 100 cups of lemon juice, which we were then able to use to make lemonade with students as well. And having students be part of that process of both the harvesting and then the preparing and the eating really helps to emphasize interconnection. We often talk about food as like a gift from the earth and how that can be an act of reciprocity in as we care for this garden that gives us food, we then get the gift of the garden to eat. And then beyond food spaces, these are also just really wonderful spaces to do other hands-on activities, especially even if we have really hot weather like yesterday or rainy days. So it's really useful to have a covered space like the outdoor kitchen in the garden so that we can take a group there and maybe stuff seed packets or do a different sort of activities when they don't want to be as outside in the classroom, but we still want to be able to hold garden classes in all weather. And we, I think, have only canceled garden class once or twice this year, even with some of the rains and different weather conditions. And so that feels really lucky to still be able to offer them an experience even under different conditions. And then this is one of my favorite aspects of our garden is all of the pollinator plants and perennials that we have the opportunity to plant. So we have ample space in our garden, which means that we have a lot of area to grow a lot of different types of plants. And biodiversity, not having just food crops, not having just row crops, but also having flowers, having, not pictured here, but native plants in different areas of the garden helps to build that idea of like interconnection and all of the different pieces that different plants play into the role of an ecosystem. It also helps us to create a healthy habitat for our pollinators, which of course are then interconnected with the food and the fruits that we're growing. So there's a lot of wonderful talking points here with students around how we all work together to create this garden space and to create the food that we're getting to enjoy here. I also love having flowers with students because they allow for a lot of sensory opportunities. Students can smell the flowers, they can notice the different structures and the different textures of different flower petals. And then they have the wonderful opportunity to harvest bouquets, which is a really sweet hands-on activity that also kind of cultivates this sense of care and joy in the natural beauty of the garden space. It really it makes me smile a lot when students will come in and ask if they can harvest a bouquet because it's their mom's birthday or because it's their teacher's birthday and they want to bring something beautiful to share with them. And I think it's really beautiful for them to think of that gift, that special gift being something that is encapsulating the beauty of the earth. And then in terms of having pollinator plants, that's a wonderful opportunity for us to have hands-on kind of sensory education around bees and other pollinator friends, our butterflies, our native bees as well. So we have a whole bee lesson that we do with students, and it's really nice to be able to have this area in the garden that we can have them go and have a sit spot at. We'll ask them to maybe observe how many pollinators are visiting a flower, or if they are visiting certain color flowers more often than others, thinking about how different adaptations of flower shape could make it easier or harder for a pollinator to collect nectar from that flower. So again, I think pollinator plants and perennials are a really wonderful opportunity for education with students, but also just creating natural beauty in the garden and reminding us that the garden space is both a place where we get to grow food for ourselves, but also a habitat and an ecosystem that we're sharing with other creatures and trying to really tie those values into the work that we're doing with students as well. Then I'm going to pass it off to Sophia for our next spot.
Yes, thank you, Tamika. And I'm just noticing a few questions over in the chat that I've been quickly responding to. And again, we are going to have a Q&A time at the end. So definitely hang on to those and we'll chat more about them all together as a group. But we are going to talk about crops. And I would like to speak to Audrey's question, is there significance to the plants in the middle of the Ramada? And that was actually a really intentionally created bed. And the idea behind that is that we have a little bit of everything is in that center space so that as students arrive and begin to get seated, they get really inquisitive about what's in that center bed. And that's a moment where we can start talking about seasonality, asking questions about the season, you know, what do you notice? And what sorts of things are you noticing at the farmers markets or in the stores? So pretty soon we'll be turning that bed over and putting in all of our summer crops there. So when the students arrive in the fall, they'll be seeing winter squash, corn, beans, and it's just a great segue into going out into the rows and working in the crops. So that's actually one of my favorite parts of the garden. And I think that could easily be incorporated potentially into other spaces with like a small raised bed or even just pots to really get them noticing, like, maybe they're not able to take in the entire garden space, obviously, in one sitting. We are on an acre, but they can see that almost everything that's in that circle is going to be out there in the rows. And I think that's a really beautiful introduction into the space. And then just quickly, a couple others. How often do we switch out the bales? Under our grandmother oak, we do have our hay bale seating area. Actually, it's straw, and we use it for bedding for our chickens. And also, I'm going to talk a little bit about mulching. You can see in these crop photos around the plants, we do mulch them with straw, and we just use it as needed. It goes into the compost, it becomes earth again, and then as we need to switch out the bales, we'll buy new ones. But generally, you know, they'll start to rot and break down as we get the wonderfully wet winter that is on the way for us this year. And then, yeah, the water from our outdoor sink goes directly into a little native planting area where we have one of my personal favorites, the California pipevine, growing up on the side of our outdoor kitchen there. And we do have little pollinator perennial areas all around the garden, which are really sweet. I hope you get to come someday, and they're really sweet little sitting areas with benches surrounded by different sages and natives. So we do want to keep our pollinators happy all around the area. And we do have, which we're not really talking about in this presentation, but we do have a little orchard with our own beehive. So always thinking about what are our bees out there eating and what's flowering right now, what's available for them. So all times of year we have different flowering pollinator areas. So talking about our crops here, what is the purpose? Why are we growing food? Edible education. And the use of our food is to cultivate different foods to go into our kitchen for our cooking classes. So we meet with our chef teachers, we talk about what their lessons are coming up, what their needs may be, and how we can provide as much food as possible to go into the kitchen for those cooking classes, which is a really beautiful connection that we get to make with students. For example, you know, remember shelling the beans in the fall. Well, in a few months, you're going to be having them as tacos in your kitchen class. So it's really beautiful for them to be able to touch the beans, have their hands on them, shell them, and then later, you know, wash them, soak them, and prepare them for the taco lesson. And then we also do tastings. All of our garden classes, pretty much all of our garden classes include a tasting. So we're growing for those two purposes. And then of course, working with the students and the plants creates multiple opportunities for land stewardship so they feel connected. We really like to use the language of your garden, our garden, so that they feel some ownership, and endless experiential opportunities and teachable moments arise as the students do all of the, or are a part of all of the seed saving, planting, sowing, transplanting, care, harvest, removal, cultivating, and then planting again. So they're incorporated in all of that, and endless teachable moments will arise. We do have excess food sometimes, and it's one of my favorite things. We go set up like a little mini free farm stand at the end of the day, right where the students are unlocking their bikes and heading out of the gate to head to their homes. And so we'll have a little giveaway and we might announce it. And it's always a fun time to see how quickly the food moves. And sometimes we'll time it like, wow, it only took 5 minutes that time for everything to disappear. So it's really fun to be able to send them home. Sometimes if we have extra starts from our greenhouse area that we don't need, we'll let them take plants home as well. And it's really exciting to watch them fit them all into their backpack and on their bikes and head home with some new babies. Our row crops are grown in 3-foot beds with 2-foot wide pathways that we sheet mulch with repurposed cardboard and free wood mulch from local tree companies. And I know there is a really cool, at least here in the Bay Area, there is a really cool app that you can get on and just kind of get on a list when there's free mulch to be delivered. So there's definitely lots of resources for that. And I don't know if y'all know anybody that orders from Amazon, but we don't really have any trouble finding plenty of cardboard. It's just kind of getting it here. So we do a lot of mulching, of course, for water retention, to keep the soil health. And I also talk about how we're creating habitat for the different critters that live in the garden. Because once you pull that cardboard up, you'll see there's a lot of action going on under there. And we want to keep our critters happy too. Our large pathways have been really integral in making it easier for the kids to plant and move through the space easily. Our plants are mulched with the straw that come from our straw bale seeds. As they start to decompose, we'll take them out into the garden, use them again for chicken bedding. And it also helps students notice. If we can say, please walk on the wood chips and notice that the plants are going to be growing around the straw, or if we have little baby plants, just kind of helps visually for the students to see what is walking and what is an area that we don't want to compact with our feet. Utilize drip irrigation for water efficiency. I'm sure that's pretty common to a lot of y'all, but we can talk more about that if you have questions. For garden class tastings, we're always planning this several months ahead, and we're thinking about how can students just walk around and graze? What are things that they can just pick and maybe wash or just maybe eat right away, that are really easy, raw, tasty things. So some of our favorite tastings have been tomatoes, carrots, apples, peas were a big hit this spring. And then of course our winter squash, our beans, things like that are more aimed for the kitchen cooking classes. You can see in the bottom left picture, we have T-posts and metal fencing used for trellising. And those are our baby beans right now. So as the students are arriving in the fall, we'll have these beautiful bean tunnels for them to explore. And it's really fun watching them kind of go through the maze of the beans. And again, those will eventually become delicious tacos. Just keep thinking about tacos today. The photo on the right shows a field and cover crop used rotationally each year for soil fertility. If we could only get teacher Tomika to stop eating all the pea shoots. There's a lot of delicious things that pop up in our cover crop, and it's fun to explore those with the kids as well and see how much the bees are foraging on them as they are coming into flower. And some of the core values that are woven into our crop rows are community building, as it's all, the students are working together to create these rows and to get them planted, transplanted, to care for them. Sensory hands-on education, and of course interconnection of humans, land, and foods. So all of our core values are represented here in our crop rows. All right, and we're going to move over to the greenhouse propagation area now. And again, this was a kit that was added to the garden in about 2000. And this is where we grow all of our own plants. This space is utilized for seed saving, sowing seeds, upsizing plants into bigger pots, and making our various soil mixes with the students, which is also one of our favorite activities. We do make our own potting mix here on site, and we call that breakfast mix. And then we also have a recipe that the students follow called the lunch mix. And that's what we use for upsizing our larger plants into. So that's always a fun little activity, getting to follow the recipe using their skills that they've picked up in the kitchen and mixing up a little food for our plants. And students are involved in all stages of the plant life cycle here, and it helps to create an understanding of the care and resources necessary to grow their food, as well as creating a sense of responsibility and connection to the land and the foods. Students love going into the greenhouse and checking on the little babies. They especially love grabbing a little wooden popsicle stick and giving them a name. And sometimes we'll hear, "Welcome to the garden, Carl the cucumber," or sometimes we'll have 50 plants and they all have their own names. So I think that's a beautiful opportunity for creativity and silliness and connection to the plants, and just allowing them to be kids and to be connected a little bit through a little bit of ownership by adding a name. Through the process of plant care, students increase their sense of interconnection to the earth and resources needed to grow food. Truly hands-on education here in the greenhouse. And now we're going to move on over into our tool shed area again, which is one of my favorite spaces in the edible schoolyard. It is very well organized. The space is used by over 1,000 students each school year, so it must be well organized with very obvious organizational structures. Each tool is color-coded, so students can easily see where the tools live. Red tools go outside on the rolling racks. Yellow tools come inside and have a home to be grouped together with like tools. Students are allowed to use real tools as a measure of trust building, confidence building, and to do real garden work with the right tool for the right job. And sometimes the right tool is a wheelbarrow, and the job is to give your friend a ride back to the tool shed at the end of the class. We do allow a bit of time for play and exploration at the end of our class times, and we think that this is really important with students being indoors all day and being engaged in a different kind of space. We really like to allow them to come outside and again, let them be a little childlike and playful. So wheelbarrow rides is a favorite pastime, sometimes during lunch or at the end of our classes during exploration time. And we do have really sturdy wheelbarrows for that. The last feature to visit is the tool cleaning station just outside of the shed. Here, students are shown during orientation how to scrape tools clean, how to use the sand buckets with linseed oil to polish and preserve the metals of the tools. There are also written instructions with hand-drawn pictures as reminders should they forget how to clean the tools properly. And core values achieved in the tool shed are hands-on education as well. And then from the tool shed nearby are our beloved birds, and Jason's going to talk to us a little bit about the birds.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And hello again, everyone. I am going to take the opportunity to close out the last two slides of this slideshow presentation. And I do want, before I get started, just to let you all know out there that we're seeing all the questions on the chat, and some questions were just answered by Sophia, so thank you so much for that. Keep those questions coming. But the questions that haven't been answered are being transferred over to a Padlet, which will be where we're going to be going after the slideshow presentation. So please just know that we are attempting to answer as many and as all the questions as possible. So as Sophia mentioned, we are now on the slide of our birds. So thinking about the chickens and ducks and the prompts that Tamika shared with us in terms of our core values, wanted to share a little bit. But before, and I'm going to read just what I have, because I think that I'll be able to articulate myself a little bit better in that way. But I do want to mention that the chickens and ducks in the garden is a special addition to the garden. It's something that we've had for a long time. And every single incoming sixth grader who comes to King here at the Edible Schoolyard is given an opportunity to go through what we call the 4 Bs in relationship to a poster that we call Respect in the Garden. And this is a presentation that we do like I said, at the beginning of the school year for our incoming sixth graders before they actually come out to the garden for their first class. And respect in the garden is very important in terms of following the 4 Bs: be respectful, be responsible, be an ally, and be safe. And be under the category of being respectful. We spend a lot of time talking about how we can be respectful to each other and all the animals, including the chickens and ducks. And up until just this past year, we would actually bring in a live chicken to get the students excited. We aired to not do that this year because it's a lot of pressure and maybe a little anxiety for the chicken. So we brought just a stuffed chicken to reinforce the idea that they will be interacting with the chickens and birds if they choose to do so. Okay, so going back to the presentation, having chickens and ducks in the garden adds an element of interconnectedness and helps to reinforce the value of care and daily chores that is required for animal husbandry, like any animal in a garden or farm setting. For many years, students learn what it takes to raise animals in a garden setting and build relationships through those efforts. The simple act of collecting eggs or holding and petting a chicken can enhance hands-on learning, right? We believe that. So when students are given the chance to observe and make connections about the birds, community building takes place through the inquiry and the wonderment of conversations. So lots of conversations, lots of curiosity. We encourage that. And some of the questions that have surfaced over the years that I've captured are someone noticing, can you see how chickens are descendants of dinosaurs, right? And you can just take a look at their body structure and really make those connections. I've heard, why don't our ducks just fly away, right? Because obviously there are lots of ducks that do. Another question that comes about a lot from our students is, how come our eggs never hatch into chicks, right? So they're fascinated with the idea that the eggs will turn into chicks, but we don't have a rooster. So we talk about the fertilization of eggs and how they're just eggs that aren't fertilized and we eat them. And then another question or another development of question is I noticed that the ducks like to swim, right? Because we have lots of areas where the ducks can actually swim, but the chickens don't swim. And why is that, right? So there's this comparison between the two birds. They're similar in many ways, but quite different in the behaviors and the ways that they interact with each other. So many students are attracted to chickens and ducks and choose to spend their exploration time, right? The free time that Sophia was mentioning that we carve out at the end of garden class, so that they can interact with the birds. They find and follow the birds through the expansive hillside. So the birds have this beautiful chicken runner area that they could just roam around. And you'll see the students kind of crouching through all the brambles of bushes, which there's quite a lot on that hillside. They sometimes go into the coop and see these birds patiently sitting in their nesting boxes. Perhaps they're brooding, right? Which they do a lot. Or sometimes they're just crowded together because perhaps they're cold, right? So a lot of times students will see multiple chickens in a box with many boxes empty, and they're like, why did they do that, right? Seems crowded. So students learn quickly that the waste of the chicken and ducks is useful for sparking bacteria in a compost pile, right? So that the act of removing used straw that is littered with manure is necessary for keeping up with the birds and sanitary purposes, but it also shows the interconnectedness of the food web and in the garden ecosystem, right? So taking some of the inputs and then bringing it over to other systems, and it's all connected. So students help with the tending of the garden, right? Which is something that Sophia mentioned, with a task of, like, say, transplanting a crop like collard greens. We're big on collard greens. We love collard greens. And eventually they harvest the greens, right? And then they'll take the choice greens and bring them perhaps to the kitchen for, say, a recipe. A famous recipe in the kitchen is the greens over grains lessons. But then the not so ideal leaves, the ones that have started to, turn yellow or, just not so appetizing for us as humans, can be fed to the birds, right? So that then the birds eat the leaves, as we would imagine. They get nourishment from it, and then in return, we'll get eggs, right? And then the eggs are used in kitchen classes, like again for the greens over grains recipe or other recipes. So that's a little bit about the chickens and ducks. I want to also just share a quick story. I think we have just a little bit of time left here. Like I said, the students are so fascinated with the birds. Even I've seen obviously the toddlers fascinated, but middle school students are very fascinated with chickens and ducks, and they become very attached to them. And years ago, we, as you can imagine, chickens and ducks, like any living creature, eventually die. And it can be, it can have a huge impact on a lot of our students. Many years ago, there were a group of students who felt so strong about one of the chickens who passed away. And they created a sort of like a memorial service for the chicken and buried the chicken and created a little stone and whatnot. So it's just to kind of emphasize that there's a lot of impact that the chickens and ducks have on our students here at the Edible School Year. Okay, move on to the next slide. So the next slide is about our final slide before we end here is about Compost Row. And just like the chickens and ducks, one of our first lessons that we do with our incoming sixth grader is the compost lab. So it's really important that our students are getting this information because they're going to be working with all the different composting systems. But specifically, I'm going to talk about Compost Row and the core values that we were mentioning. So in Compost Row, in the garden, building the health and the fertility of the soil is key to healthy plants and animals, right? So compost piles are necessary components in order to keep it all thriving. Students learn from early inquiry and exploration, using magnifying glasses to take a closer look at the activity of life in the compost pile, and they can trace the progression of decomposition throughout the garden, right? And as we know, it's all about the fungi, the bacteria, and the invertebrates, right? The FBI, and they're identified as the reason for decomposition, right? So students, know this, and they continue to expand on that knowledge. Connections are made with the core concepts of all of this happening on our planet, right? Through the cycling of matter, right? Which is the core concept that we talk about, and the essential elements like carbon and nitrogen that are constantly being transferred among the entire garden, right? So students make the analogies between the heating of compost piles and the body heat of all the activity of those decomposers with their own body heat, right? That we're constantly releasing, right, as people. So the analogy that that comes up in our compost lab is and the question that we kind of make that connection with is, have you ever been inside a room with the windows and the doors closed and there's a dance party happening, right? Where does that heat come from, right? So that's the question, right? And so it's because of the body heat. And so all the moving and the pooping and of all the microorganisms in the FBI. And so let's say in the morning, we can visually see the temperature. We could see the steaming of a compost pile that's been sitting for a while, that's getting very hot. And we can actually look at the temperature by using a thermometer and make those connections. Visual aids like the Compost Row sign that you see here in the upper right-hand corner, and the compost cake poster, which is what we use as the visual aid for the compost lab, gives context and reinforces these core ideas, right? So students use real tools to build and turn and sift compost piles using all their senses, right? So sight, smell, hearing, and whatnot. So sometimes the sense of smell is the focal point, right? We all had this moment where we've all smelled a compost pile that is just not getting enough oxygen, right? It's anaerobic. And so the core idea that we're diverting waste from the landfills creates opportunities for the entire school community to bring over their leftover vegetable scraps from home to be a part of the compost system. And so in the end, students make the connection that the final product, right, what we're trying to get to, this enriched soil, or as we refer to as black gold, I like to call it black gold, is then applied directly to plants while we're transplanting or a top dress, and that helps nourish the plants in the garden. So the last thing I'll say about composting, again, a quick story before we move from our presentation here, is that, you know, thinking about the compost piles and the heat that's generated, we know that compost piles in a hot compost pile can get anywhere from 100 to 160 degrees. So hot enough to burn your hand if you were to stick your hand inside the compost pile, which we don't recommend, right? But we know that it's very hot because of the thermometer. There was a group of students that we got a chance to work with years ago through a counseling and enrich program, and they were so fascinated with the steaming, as I was mentioning earlier, of the compost pile. And we mentioned that it's hot enough to cook, say, like an egg in it. And they were very fascinated by this idea. So we had an experiment. We took some eggs, we wrapped them in tinfoil. We figured out a way to create a chamber in which we could stick the eggs in the center of the compost pile. And then they came back the following day, sometime in the early morning, to pull the eggs out and see if those eggs went from to like a hard-boiled state. Which they did, right? Which they did. Of course, the kicker for me is that when it came down to asking, okay, who's ready to eat the eggs? None of them said, I'm not eating those eggs. Those came from a compost pile. So fun story there. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm going to pass it over to Sophia to talk about this Padlet that we're about to do.
Yes, thank you, Jason. And that was the conclusion of our little tour time through the Berkeley Edible Schoolyard here. And this is, again, the picture of our entrance gate and the herb garden there. And I'll just mention, I don't know if folks know this, but it is summertime, and y'all can definitely swing by and come visit our garden sometime. It is open to the public, and we'll be here working all summer. But now we're going to be moving into our question and answer time. So we're going to be dropping into the chat a little link for a Padlet, which is a tool that we've been using during our big ESY meetings as we're all kind of spread out in different offices. And it's a great little communication tool. It's a space where you can post your questions, and we definitely want to recognize and honor that there are a lot of very experienced voices here present with us, and we don't have all the answers, but we can tell you what we do. So we really want to encourage everyone to open up that Padlet, come and bring your questions there, and also feel free to jump in and give your answers and what works in your space, things that you've tried. And we'll also be kind of moderating that space and giving our answers as well. So let's all go ahead, and you can see Russell up here in the chat added the Padlet link. And so if everyone can just go ahead and open that up, we'll have two windows running. We'll have a little conversation as well as Q&A time here.
Thank you, Russell. So I think what we're hoping to do is, as people populate the Padlet, we're just going to go ahead and go through these questions and answer them. So either myself, Sophia, or Tamika will chime in. And so thank you all for taking the time to open up the Padlet and begin to add your questions. See, starting here on the first category, physical infrastructures and systems. Do you reuse the water from the outdoor sink? There is a gray water component to it. So really cool to talk about, the idea of conserving water. So a gray water connection to a sink or a roof or something where you're reusing water is really important for all of us. And so it simply just kind of spills out from one of the sides of the outdoor kitchen, in the outdoor kitchen sink, should I say, and into a perennial area. So yeah, that's a cool addition to that space. I'm wondering if some of these questions were already answered in the chat. So hopefully.
Yeah, so we talked about the pollinator space.
Right.
We do have little pollinator gardens all around our space.
And I think also tied to that, something, if you don't have as much space, something we've been doing is putting flowers as bed ends at the end of the rows where we're growing vegetables. So that's a really easy way to just mix in some flowers or some pollinator plants if you have less space, or just if you don't have the area to put it all together.
Right, and with Tamika mentioning the bed end space, why would you put it at the bed end? Let's say it's a row of carrots that you know they're going to be pulled out before that flower is done. You don't have to like take it out because it's at one of the ends. It's pretty obvious, but yeah. Do you have recommendations for sturdy temporary shade structures until more permanent ones? Well, with the Ramada, as you saw from the pictures, we actually don't have the shade that we need so far. We're growing the grapevines, so we're kind of dealing with that as well. But we purchased some of the sort of the car canopies, the pop-up tents. I would err on spending a little bit more and getting a nicer one. They can be a little flimsy, but pretty easy to set up, and you can just move them around. We also use stands with umbrellas for certain areas of the garden to give shade.
Or you could just do a fun team building activity and get a cheap tarp and some rope and see what the kids can come up with if you have space. I've definitely done that in spaces where I don't have shade, and it's kind of a fun problem solving activity for them to try and figure out how to build their own shade if you have time for that.
A fun challenge for everyone, right? Yes. How do you protect the birds from predators while they're free range? So, while they're out and about, they are pretty good about taking care of themselves. We have Cooper hawks once in a while that come by, but they will hide underneath some of the bushes. It's really important that they go back into the coop, right? So we don't really have too many problems with predators during the day. They know how to sort of hide. We don't allow dogs on the campus, so that's good. But I know that we're interested in creating a situation for our coop so that it's just automatically closes behind them, but we physically train them to go back into the coop. Once they're in the coop, they're pretty safe.
And how do we discourage rodents from the compost pile? I mean, they definitely are there, they're present. But the beautiful thing about the circle of life is that they attract predators. So I've also seen our Cooper's hawks sitting on some of our trellises hunting for the rodents that have come into the garden. And we have a couple neighborhood cats who have been adopted by the entire school and are very beloved. And they come and hunt in the garden space every morning. You could work with hardware cloth if you're doing like a more permanent kind of structure, like if you're using wood and you want to line it and really wrap it up and keep it tight. But everywhere I've been, there's a certain level of rodents with your compost, and I think it's just great to keep that circle of life going and maybe get a cat friend, or maybe they'll be attracted from the neighborhood as well. But also just trying to bury the food under, like if we've pulled some crops or if we have some potting soil that we're dumping out, if we can just kind of bury the actual smelly food bits in there. And our compost is pretty active and it heats up pretty quick. So it's not sitting too long in a delicious food state.
Just want to mention that the comment feature has now been enabled for the Padlet. So if you have responses that you want to add to questions that you're seeing, feel free to add them there as well. And then just to give a little bit of background on how our classes work to, I think, address some of the questions in the teaching practices. When we see students, they're coming out with their science teacher. And they come out every year in King. So they come out in 6th grade. For the most, I think we saw them maybe 11 times, 11 different classes with students. And that's for an hour and a half with their science teacher. What they would normally be doing as science class time in the classroom becomes garden time. And we see them with 6th graders roughly every 2 weeks. Seventh and eighth graders will see a little bit less often, and that varies. Sometimes we see them for the 90-minute period. This year we also had some time where we're seeing them in the 50-minute period that they have. Again, working with your school's schedule, I think this is a fun jigsaw, but we definitely find that we prefer having the 90-minute periods, or are trying to shift to mostly seeing all students, not just sixth graders, but seventh and eighth graders as well during their 90-minute class period with their science teacher. And so when we're thinking about designing our lessons or designing our student experience, we are thinking about it as a 3-year experience. So students will do compost and bee lesson in 6th grade. They probably won't do that in 7th or 8th grade. They'll still interact with the compost and they'll still interact with pollinators, but that specific lesson will not be something that they have in 7th or 8th grade. That said, we made some changes this year because students had missed out on their 6th grade experience because of COVID. But generally, we're thinking about the experience that students are having as a holistic 3-year middle school experience from their time in 6th grade in the garden, 7th grade, and then 8th grade. I think in terms of group size, we have 3 garden teachers, so we will often break the group up into 3 smaller. We'll start with an opening circle and end with a closing circle, but we will usually break the group up into our 3 groups. So it's about 10 students per group, which just makes it a lot easier to facilitate those kinds of hands-on activities and learning experiences. And even just to keep attention in the garden. There's a lot of different distractions for sure. And so it's a lot easier if we can build the relationships with a smaller group. It's much easier than building a relationship with all 1,000 students that we have at King. So hopefully that answers some of those questions that were popping up in the teaching practices section. We'll continue to go through and try to respond to you all as well.
I see one on pollinators. How's the students' response to the lesson plans surrounding pollinators and bees? So one of the first lessons that we do with students coming in to our school in 6th grade is we start pretty early on in the fall with a bee lesson. So they go down to our top bar hive and there's various activities. First, they're interacting with bees that were collected as dead bees in our little collection of native bees. So we're slowly building them up to come and interact with the bees that are alive and moving around the space. And it's just kind of a slow progression to make sure that they feel comfortable because we are lucky. We do have a great health of pollinators in our space and there's a lot of variety. So we want to make sure that they feel safe and comfortable. And generally that's just exposure and education if they haven't been around bees or flying critters a lot in general. So slow exposure early in the year and then throughout their time.
Yeah, so I'm taking the time to respond to some of the questions in the post. So
Yeah.
So thank you, Sophia and Tamika, for saying verbally.
Regarding the question on cultural competency in the garden, I think that there's kind of 2 pieces for that. So when we think about the crops that we want to grow, I think we're thinking about the utility for tasting in garden. What's going to be easy to harvest and eat in the garden? We're thinking about what needs to be grown for the kitchen use. What are they going to use in their recipes, and how can we help to provide that produce? And then I think we're also thinking what's something that's useful and has a lot of educational value to grow. And so, for example, we have tomatillos growing because not necessarily are we going to eat them with students in the garden or use them a lot in the kitchen classroom, but we want to be representing different cultures in the crop plan. Something that was really, really exciting for me this year was we had gailan, or Chinese broccoli. And so I loved getting to share that with students, getting to talk about my own experience eating that growing up, how my grandma would prepare it, and the similarities and differences that has to normal broccoli. And so I think our crop plan is a big part of how cultural competencies can show up. And then also I think just in sharing our stories, also inviting other students to share their stories of how food and garden is showing up in their lives. We try to create a lot of space for student talk time, both when we're having a tasting or when we're doing different garden activities. And through that, I think seeing students as they come to the garden in their diverse range of cultures and backgrounds and experiences or lack of experiences with these foods, with growing in this way is part of the way that we make space for that. That said, I think it's also something that we're always trying to learn and grow with the students and with each other. So know that we're having a lot of conversations around that and thinking about how this space can feel really accessible and representative of the student body that we work with.
I love this question. How do you handle your lesson plan versus cool stuff happening that the kids would rather check out? My philosophy, and something that I feel like has really been embraced here at Edible Schoolyard, is allow Mother Earth to be the lead teacher, and I'm just kind of the guide on the side here. And if something, if a lizard runs by and something really exciting is happening, I don't fight it. I taught and that's just kind of building your tool belt as well. I think being able to just kind of riff on those things and speak to those things, that comes with experience, and also just your own connection with your garden and with your space. So yeah, a lizard ran by. How is that a part of the habitat here? How is that a part of the ecosystem? How is that of benefit, or how could that be a challenge? And I think it's really important to just kind of be like water and flow with them as they go, rather than trying to fight it and steal their attention back. Maybe I'm trying to hit a science standard, or I really need to talk about what they're doing hands-on. But if there's something else more interesting happening, that's in our space too, and that's of value, and it's all connected. And that's also a big philosophy of mine, is helping them to understand that everything is connected. And they can see we've veered from what we were talking about now. And that's my opportunity to say, everything is connected. It's okay. We can talk about these birds fighting over here because we want birds in our environment, and how do they interact and how are they of benefit.
Let's see. And thank you all for continuing to add questions. In case anyone isn't familiar with Padlet, it will be a resource for you for even after this session closes. So we'll try to continue to answer those questions, even if we don't have time to answer them right now in this session. Seeing some questions about water source and rainwater as well. And so most of our irrigation lines are connected to the school water source, which is, I think, really lucky for us, and that we aren't having to pay for our water in that way. But we do also have a rainwater catchment system that has been set up with our tool shed, and it is all operating on gravity. So I don't know if you remember the photo. Our tool shed has a slanted roof, so the water will flow down the roof into the gutter, and then through a piping system to get into our big barrels that we have for storing that rainwater. And that's both a fun way to talk about water flow with students, and then a resource for us. So we will use that water with students, particularly if we want water that hasn't been treated or that isn't city water. They can tap on the big barrel to try to figure out where the water is right now. It was very fun to do that back in October, I believe, is when we had that huge storm here in the Bay Area. And so they definitely were like, oh, I wonder how much water we got. So it's fun to go over there and kind of get to have that hands-on visual for that. Let's see.
I see a question. I think, are the kids able to manage the space? How long does it take for the teachers or other people to take care of the space? So yeah, just to be open here, there are 4 of us that manage this acre together, and it's definitely not all managed by the students, but we try and make sure that they get their hands into every aspect of it at some point throughout their school year. So we want them composting, we want them working in the greenhouse, transplanting, harvesting, and all of those different aspects, but they're definitely not maintaining the space to the degree that it needs to be to make sure that we have food and that it's being harvested. So we do also have a garden specialist as well as 3 garden educators, and we all work together to maintain the garden space. And the kids definitely do a lot, and many hands make light work. But there's always the back end stuff and just making sure things are keeping going as far as summer too. So right now we're just thinking about what will be available for harvest in the fall and how can we keep that going and make sure we have good food ready for them when they come back. And we do not have any summer programming right now. We have, I saw that question as well. We have pre-COVID, but not at the moment.
With regards, sorry, I'm just seeing questions that are coming up but are also getting answered. In regards to learning across the curriculum, I think so students come out with their science class, but I would say the garden is, you can learn anything in the garden. And I think when we approach what our approach often to our time with students is how can we basically make everything a learning moment in those different ways. So maybe sometimes it is talking more about like the history of a crop or of a different practice or a tool that we're using. Maybe sometimes it's storytelling and practicing expanding their vocabulary or thinking about almost like plot points and telling the story of the garden. And sometimes it is something that's maybe more like science, like the structure of a flower. I think the kind of going off of what Sophia was saying earlier, I think the beauty of the garden is that it itself is the teacher. And so whatever like kind of lessons or content are naturally coming up for us, we will sort of riff off of that rather than trying to put our own ideas of what students should be learning for a given class period. So I don't know if that helps to go with that question. And also in terms of questions about accessibility or bilingual students, I think we, again, really emphasize that students can show up to garden class as they are. So often students who have special needs will come potentially with like their classroom aid, and we ask them to participate in whatever way feels good for them. And so sometimes that's participating in the activity that the rest of the group is doing, and sometimes that's maybe going to spend time observing Bamboo, the cat who likes to visit the garden. Maybe sometimes that's helping out with another sort of special side job that we have going on. In terms of bilingual education, we don't have any specific curriculum or practices that we have with that, but I think as it naturally comes up, if students want to share, or if we want to share potentially the name or of something that we're doing, that will surface in garden class as well.
And I'm seeing a few times, but yeah, again, the garden is open when school is not in session. So come on by, say hello. Maybe we should avoid having cats in the garden. They're neighbors. They come over whether we want them to or not. And I think they're of more benefit than anything. I'm curious, garden team, I know we had some speakers recently about a grant that was coming up, and I see some folks asking about funding. Maybe Russell or Nick, do y'all have more info about that grant that was available? I think it's due next week, but we did just hear about a lot of money that's available.
So the California Department of Food and Agriculture Office of Farm to Fork has a farm to school incubator grant that's open right now. There's a total of, it is for California residents and programs only, and I know this is an event with a national and international reach, but for our California residents, there is $25.5 million available through this program. Applications are due July 6th at 5 p.m. They can fund farm to school programming. They can fund changes in school food procurement. And I will drop a link in the chat shortly.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick.
Scrolling through questions.
Do you have any programs to teach herbal wisdom? Do you have any meditation areas? That's actually something that we have really appreciated about our garden space this year is there are lots of nice little nooks. Our counseling team really utilizes the garden with students that need to take a break, get outside, and come and just enjoy the space. And I think that's a benefit of having a large space with lots of little spots where folks can sit and enjoy. Nothing super intentional as far as meditation or anything like that. We do all have our own small group practices that we utilize for traditions and routines in our weekly classes, but the garden is just a naturally healing space, and it's definitely used that way. And even now in the summer, I'm seeing neighbors coming and doing yoga in the garden and just enjoying the space as well. And we do, we talk about some of our herbs and planning on creating a little bit more of a herbal-based after-school program this year with Tomika and I. So we're really excited to play a little bit more with our elderberries and start doing a little bit more herbal education with the students, not during class time, but in their elective after-school time.
We do have a ton of herbs throughout the garden and in our front herb garden that we don't necessarily talk about in like specific medicinal ways, but making tea with students is a really fun and easy thing, I'd say, to do at any scale, and a way to talk about, just the different properties of healing and the different ways that we can enjoy the herbs that we have in our space. Also noticing time, maybe we could answer like one or two more, and then again we will continue to respond to the Padlet so that you'll have that as a resource afterwards, and also want to highlight that there's a ton of resources on the Edible Schoolyard website, especially if you're looking for things in terms of like specific curriculum or also kind of how to get started or like little bits, like ways to do this on a smaller scale. And then of course, also want to highlight that there will be more sessions coming as part of our virtual training. So definitely, if you're looking, there's like a specific session on funding. If you're looking to think more about those sorts of pieces, definitely want to encourage folks to attend those as well.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a question in the chat. Do you think something similar would be achievable for kids to create? Yes! I am 13 years old, amazing, and would be interested in working on a similar project in my organization. We have so many resources on our website, and again, all of these different sessions that we'll be holding this week can be of benefit. And yes, reach out to us. We would love to support you in creating a garden or whatever it is that you're dreaming. I absolutely think 13, any age, you can garden and you can create a beautiful space. Absolutely. Thank you for asking that question.
I think we might start going towards wrapping up. Again, this Padlet will still be there. You can continue to add questions to it, and we'll try to continue to answer them. But as we wrap up, we do just want to give y'all an opportunity to do a last little reflection and think about all of the different things that you've seen, pieces that you've heard about our garden classroom. And just a little last checkout question that we're going to put in the chat for you is, what's something new that you're excited to try in your garden space or in your work? And so would love to hear where you're at now and what's exciting for you. Maybe you are wanting to try to have students observe flowers. Maybe you want to eat with them more in your garden. Loving seeing all these answers coming in. Thank you, folks. Yes.
Yes, rain catchment.
Composting.
Naming the babies.
Naming the babies.
That's
So
naming
fun.
the plants, folks. It's a good one.
Yes. Naming the chickens too, and ducks. Didn't talk about that too much.
Chickens can, I think having chickens at a program is transformational. Being able to create relationship with an animal, huge. And you only need like a couple. So they can have friends.
Ancient grains. I like it.
Perennials.
Building networks. Yeah.
That's growing communities.
Mm-hmm.
A 6-pot garden, awesome. 7 pots this year.
Yay.
Absolutely. It can be the smallest.
Peaceful sensory to reflect and relax. Yes. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm.
Yeah, healing.
Yes, that's so important.
Ooh, seeds. Oh, we could do a whole other session on seeds.
Counseling in the garden. Yes, it's big here.
Mm-hmm.
Edible Square.
Observation. Yeah, sometimes I tend to overplan in the power of just sitting still and observing. Very powerful.
Mm.
Spice garden. I love that.
Yeah. Spicy.
Compost thermometer, great investment. So fun to watch it move.
Yeah. Companion planting. Yes.
Friends.
Tacos.
Yes. Salsa garden.
All right, I think we're. Go ahead, Tommy.
Yeah, no, I think we're about to say the same thing. But yeah, I think we do want to be mindful of folks' time. And thank you all again for coming. I don't know if Russell or Nick, you have any last things you want to say in terms of logistics. I know there will be a survey coming your way right after you leave this Zoom room. And so we would love to hear your feedback. So please do fill that out if you have the time. And again, so many resources on the website and more to come later this week.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Happy gardening.
Thank you, everybody.
Happy
Tune
growing.
back in 90 minutes for the Exploring the Kitchen Classroom session. Again, that'll start at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Hope to see you then.